Shalom and welcome to Life Lessons. It is the 23rd segment since we began from the beginning of the book of Genesis. And today with this 23rd segment or lesson, we conclude the book of Exodus. So that is what we would call the final portion of the book of Exodus. In Hebrew, this Parshat, this section is known as Pekudei. Pekudei means the accounting. And this we come after they finally had built the sanctuary, the tabernacle, and they're bringing now to Moses. And so there's a final accounting here of all the donations that were collected and exactly how everything was done. And then finally Moses puts everything together. And towards the end of the section, we read about the glory of God is resting on the sanctuary. But all that has happened after there was a full accounting of everything. And this is something very interesting as we see on chapter 38 towards the end, where it talks about detail by detail. So it's interesting if we see the order of things. We had like this. We're going to look on the past 5 segments, as you would say, including this one. So it began after the story of Mount Sinai and the revelation of Mount Sinai. Then we have a new thing. God comes and says, I would like to have a sanctuary, build me a home. We know God is all over, and there isn't a place in the world where He's not there. So as King Solomon has posed that question in the prophets, and he says, heavens is even not a place where you could contain you, and you want us that we should build you a place down here in this world, where it almost seems like a contradiction. The unlimited one wants a limited housing down here in this world. And we talked many times about this, that in a way that is the whole purpose of creation, that for us human beings, the creation of God, should be able to have a relationship with God, and how? By making a dwelling place for God down here in this world. And in order that this should not be something abstract, so we're actually talking about a physical building, a physical place where we could call that a house of worship. Technically speaking, you could worship anywhere. However, by having a house of worship, it somehow drives the idea home that this is something that you could almost touch with your hands. It's not something abstract. You know, as we know, many things in our lives, and when we become sometimes spiritual, and we think about spiritual things, a lot of times we get lost and we think that maybe all these things are way beyond our understanding and they're just too lofty and it's not something that we could understand and grasp. Okay, so we say to ourselves, okay, maybe some people are spiritual, but for the average of us, we are physical, materialistic people down here on earth. It's good maybe from time to time to have some kind of a spiritual aspiration, but to say that a person could 24/7 live with that kind of way, we say to ourselves, nah, this is for angels, not for us regular human beings. However, when we read in the Torah, especially when we come to this segment, we see that this is something that God did want from us, and God did want from us that you should be able to accomplish it by what? By trying to do things here in this world, as physical as it may be, but with a purpose to serve God. So when we take something that it looks so far away, no connection whatsoever with something divine, with something godly, however we use it to serve the Almighty, then all of a sudden that you just created meaning to that idea and a purpose. So a human being could maybe walk around and many hours of his day may be wasted, but if he had taken a few minutes a day and concentrated on what does God want from me, where do I fit in this whole picture, then all of a sudden his life gets a meaning. And that's something that's very important. That's what the idea of Pekudei, the idea of accounting, is here very important. So what do we see? We see God comes and says, build me a home. And you could almost look back, and Moses is taken back and says, well, what's that? And God says, listen, you're going to have to build me an ark, you're going to have to build me a menorah, you're going to have to build me an altar, with all the instruction. But at that point, when we're talking about a few segments ago, it's all instructions from God to Moses. So it's basically Moses is listening to all this. Then it continues about the priests and their garments. And I'm going to jump ahead. And then we finally, the construction begins. So here becomes a very important transformation. People collected money, donations were raised, silver was collected, silver was melted, gold was melted. The construction of the tabernacle, the sanctuary for God has become. So at that point we had gone from the commandment to do something, and many times it could be there is a commandment to do something. A person could have an idea to do something, but not necessarily it comes into doing. You know, we may have very big dreams, and we even have plans, and we dream about the plans, but as long as no nail has been knocked to the ground, then it means nothing, because it's all there. So a person could think about spiritual, but if it does not come into connecting to the materialism, to the actual physical, then there's no relationship. And we're human beings. Since we are human beings, there has to be a relationship. As we know in our day-by-day life, if a person is going to come and say, well, I have decided to devote myself completely to God, and therefore I don't want to be involved in anything materialistic. I am not going to eat. I am not going to drink. I am not going to sleep. So it's not going to take long, and that person is going to be joining somewhere above. But that's not the purpose, what God wanted. God wanted from us to be down here in this world and to accomplish a mission for Him down here. And that means to say, yes, eating, yes, drinking, yes, sleeping, and all kinds of things that needs to be done, but they are all done with a purpose, Because many times if we think that the whole idea is just to be spiritual, not connected to something materialistic down here, then it's very, very easy to forget about our mission, and we could go wrong. So we could go wrong if we completely involved in the materialism of this world and we don't devote any time to anything spiritual, that's for sure. But it could also be the danger the other way around too. When the person thinks, I am very spiritual, I really don't want to have nothing to do with anything here in this world. You know what? That is impossible. That is impossible. If you want, you could check yourself and see maybe you're an angel. And then you have to go to the angel school and they'll check you out if you're really an angel or not. But for most of us here, down here in this world, as far as we know, we are not angels, we are human beings. But God expects from us to be good human beings and to act the way a human being is supposed to. And the way a human being is supposed to act is the potential, not just the potential, the capability that God gave each one of us. We have the capability to really shine and to really do the best and even more than what we could accomplish. And as we know, we all have challenges, complications, a temptation, because God created each one of us with an important tool that it's called free choice. And sometimes this free choice that we have, we don't understand sometimes the purpose of it. And the purpose of that free choice is that we should feel that when we make a choice in serving God, it was fully our choice, and therefore we do it with joy and excitement. The verse says, serve the Lord with joy. Serve God with joy. And the best way to serve God with joy is when you feel it's your thing, when you feel it's your understanding. If you feel is that, what can I do? I'm boxed into a situation. I was brought up in a home that believes in God, and so far I believe in God too. But you know what? I've got a lot of questions. I'm not so sure. I'll do it anyways because that's the way I was brought up. But the excitement is gone. You're not so sure if I am doing the right thing. And this is what we see in front of our eyes many, many times when previous generations were not successful in giving the excitement to serve God to the next generation. So the next generation said, okay, I'll go with my parents to the house of worship because that's what they do. But since there's no excitement there, so I could guarantee you that the third generation for sure is not going to be involved in whatsoever in a relationship with God. So therefore, God gave us the free choice. And the idea of the free choice is that we should be able, with excitement, choose to do the right thing. We should not feel that we are boxed in a situation. Unfortunately, we misuse free choice, the same as other things in the world that are misused. Sometimes when guns were given for protection, and when that's misused, is also not good. There's a lot of good ideas out there in the world that we need to be very careful that they should be used in the right way. So here we comes the segment that spoke about where they collected the money, they began the construction, and here we see in our segment something very interesting. Here's the great leader, Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses himself gives a detailed accounting. This is how much we collected. This is how much it was spent. It's an amazing thing by itself because, as you could see, who from the population is going to start saying to themselves, oh, Moses was probably pocketed a little bit when he was doing that big fundraising. So, but we don't see that anyone has complained about this. And from the other point, Moses didn't have to do that. We have to understand the relationship that existed. This is the person that God turned to by the revelation and told everyone, that's who you should trust. This is my man. So therefore, at this point, anything that Moses does, nobody's going to question. But this great man, this great person, Moshe, comes and says, you know what? If you do a big project, you're building something, even if it's divine, even if it's for God, it's for the purpose of a house of worship, if it's the purpose of synagogue and things like this, there must be a detailed accounting that everyone should understand what was collected, what was spent, and exactly how things were done. So it's a very, very important lesson for all the projects to come, how wonderful they may be, and how important they may be is, so a lot of times we could get lost in, I'm doing something wonderful, I have no time for details. I have no time to go into all these accounting stuff. No, this becomes very important. And more than that is, according to our mystical understandings of these kinds of action, of these kinds of versing, by doing a accounting of the details, you elevate the details. The details all of a sudden become significant. You were counted. You are part of this great idea of building a home for God. So that piece of silver or that piece of copper, that who cared about it? It's maybe an insignificant piece. All of a sudden, that became counted. That became something very important. So we see something very interesting in that whole subject, because when we talk about the general building, so we're building a project. So at that point, what's important is you would think is the final product. Who cares about the details? But at the same time, you cannot come to the final product if there were no details. So then you look on a complete building, very beautiful building, and all looks very nice and beautiful. But what people don't realize, all the details that went in to be able to put together such an edifice, as we would say. So this is what happens over here. with the final accounting. But the order of things, so we have like this, just to repeat it very quickly. We have God's commandment, go build me a home. Then the second segment was, I need priests and I need priestly clothing. And that's what they did. But right here, before we continue, that Moses repeated all that and started the process of building, we had the segment of the sin of the golden calf. And that's not nothing and quite important in the whole story. Because after the sin of the golden calf and the repentance of our ancestors, the Jewish people, Moses resumed everything and started to tell everyone, God is waiting for the construction. So number one, if you think that because of your sins, everything falls apart, it's not so. It's just the opposite. Now that we know what a human being is capable of doing, so there's no question about it, you need to have a home for God. The home for God becomes even more important than before. Now this is important because a lot of times we think to ourselves, if I am perfect and I do everything with perfection, okay, so then I am a happy person. Maybe some of us, if there's too much perfection there, then they may be nervous also. So I don't know how good it is always to be perfect. But let's say we find some people worked on themselves and they're very perfect. A lot of times what happens to some individuals that they try to be perfect, so when things go wrong, there's a danger that they lose it completely. Because they are so much that everything should be perfect, so the minute one teeny thing didn't go right, they kind of rush to give up. And that's where the danger could be. So here comes a very important lesson that the sin of the golden calf is right in between the commandment of God of building and the actual of building. To tell us that in any situation we find ourselves, first of all, never to give up. We always could return. We always, as we say, could do teshuvah, get back to the basics, and then go ahead and build a sanctuary. So this is a very important part. Now, when we come towards the end of the section, we see something interesting here. It tells us as follows. Here, everything is put together, all the pieces where they belong, the ark where it belongs, the menorah where it belongs, the altar where it belongs, the priests are all set. Comes the verse and says, the cloud resided and the glory of God filled up the tabernacle. Filled up the tabernacle. This is the time in the desert, okay? It says so much so that Moses couldn't go in because the presence of God had filled up the place. This is an unbelievable accomplishment that finally everything is put together and everything is in its place, and all of a sudden the glory of God had filled up the place. The verse continues by saying, we're going to see that later on, when the cloud departed from the tabernacle, that was a sign that they should travel. So when the cloud went away, they assembled everything and they traveled. And then when they saw that the cloud is starting to come down, that was the sign, it's time to stop. So in other words, that was the sign for their traveling. So it's an interesting point here. The last verse says, for God's cloud would remain on the tabernacle by day, and there was fire on it at night before the eyes of the entire house of Israel in all their encampments. That's how it was. If the cloud didn't depart, they stayed there for quite a lot. Here's something very interesting, that when they are traveling, where are you traveling? You are traveling towards the goal. What's the goal? You're going into Israel. So that's the traveling. You're getting closer and closer. The pause is very interesting, because sometimes you could think that when you stop, maybe that's a little bit of a setback. No. Here's very interesting. When they paused, all of a sudden the glory, the cloud came down on top of the tabernacle to tell us that this pause is also part of the plan. A lot of times we're excited about something, and we know for ourselves very well. When we're in the middle of doing something, a project, while the project is going on, we give it everything that we have, and we're so tuned in, nobody could stop us, high energy, fully involved. What happens the day after? So there's, I need a vacation, or a little bit of a letdown. I've known people that have worked hard and got used to the idea that they don't know what it means to rest. And when they were convinced by a spouse to take a vacation, they hated the vacation because they were so bored. What can I do on a vacation? I'm sure not that many people are that way. But in other words, when a person is so tuned in what they want to do, that they're involved with it. It's like almost when a person is involved to pray, to do good things, a whole day looking, how can I do to help other people? It doesn't stop. So the minute there's a little bit of a stop, all of a sudden there's a little bit of a letdown. So we have to know something very, very important. Even the stops are meant to serve God. Even the pauses are meant to serve God. Or we re-energize ourselves, or we prepare ourselves for the next journey. But as long as we view ourselves that every step of the way is from God's plan, this is what becomes very important. So in a way, that becomes another interesting statement here towards the end, compared to the last segment that the name was Vayakhel, gathering. Moses gathered everyone. When you say Moses gathered everyone, at that point, it doesn't make a difference who the individuals are. Everyone is being gathered. So there is an idea. God comes and says, build me a place, build me a home. Everyone is out there to help, each one according to their capabilities. So really at that point, doesn't make a difference. Is it if it's this person or that person, or it's what's their name? No, we're all together. It's a community effort. However, when we say accounting, the details becomes very important. It's like almost, hey, you, what did you do? What was your part? To each one of us. She, he. What did everyone do? So it becomes two important things. One point, there is the cause, the important cause, that we are all, from that, we are all the same. We're all here to do the same thing. However, how do we do it? The individual becomes very important, because my capabilities and the other person's capabilities may be very different. But as long as we know that we are here to serve the one God and we are here for that same cause, then there's no question about it, how we all become very important. Yes, we're all together in the same thing, but then each one's capabilities is different. This one is maybe a good painter, and this one is maybe a good carpenter, and maybe this one is very good on knocking a nail in the wall. So everyone, according to what their capability is, that's how this comes out, and that's how we all become of the same team. So that's what's very important in these segments. And as we conclude over here, we conclude here the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus is a very important book. The previous book spoke about really the preparation, telling us the history. Spoke about creation, spoke about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all the stories that happened through them. Here in the book of Exodus spoke about, in the beginning, how we were in Egypt and all the suffering that existed in Egypt. How God came and took us out from Egypt, the Exodus, with the details of the Exodus. And that the purpose of the Exodus was the sake of the revelation of God on Mount Sinai and giving us the 10 Commandments and all the instructions and the Torah. And then came the idea of building of the sanctuary. all this becomes very important in this book, known as the Book of Shmois, the Book of Names. In English, they call it the book of Exodus. So we see here something very interesting here. If you look very carefully in this segment, it does not come and say, and Moses built everything according to God's instruction. Could have easily said that. What does he say? Each detail is repeated again. So each detail, how do you do the ark? So God already gave instructions. So he could have said, and Moses did exactly as God commanded. No, he goes into all the details. And after each paragraph here, it finishes off as God has commanded Moshe. Another paragraph, it talks about everything that was done as God has commanded Moshe. You'll see if you count, there's 18 times that this is mentioned. And that's something quite interesting because it tells you also, again, this idea. There is the general idea and then there's the details. And both of them is as God told Moshe. In other words, God gave us an important tool, free choice, but this free choice was given with an important gift that it's called brains. Each one, we have brains. God gave us brains, gave us that we could think. That's where we are different than animals, because we human beings have the ability to think. To think what? Here's a danger. You could think whatever you want and God forbid come up with crazy things too. But he wants us to think on those principles that he has given to us. The principles that were given on Mount Sinai and the house for God that we're going to build, this is what he gave to us, that we should exercise our understanding to build a house for him. So this is something very important that we finish from this segment, and let all of us be successful in building our homes to serve the Almighty God. Thank you.